Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the flood mapping and green infrastructure planning study. On the next slide here, we will be having a Spanish interpretation. If you're looking for Spanish translation, please follow the instructions on this slide, and we'll take a minute or two to get the translator up and running.
Buenas tardes. Buenas tardes para todos. Mi nombre es Analía Costa. Yo voy a ser su intérprete esta noche. En un momento van a activar el sistema de interpretación. Pueden unirse al canal siguiendo las consignas que están en la diapositiva. Si no, pueden, una vez que se active el canal, pueden apretar interpretación y escoger el canal de interpretación. Si están en un teléfono celular, por favor, vayan a la parte de abajo, a la parte derecha, donde están los tres puntitos y donde dice More, que es más. Abran la pantalla ahí, escojan interpretación y escojan su canal. Muchísimas gracias. All set.
I'm going to start the interpretation, so people should see. Okay. All right, the interpretation is now going. People should see them. Okay. All right.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to see so many folks in the room, but also joining us online today. Today we are gathering for our second meeting to discuss the flooding in the neighborhoods, right? So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Hortensia de Rosario, and I work with Visit Nubian Square as a senior consultant. It's an honor to be here with you guys today, representing this community-driven effort to create a sustainable solution for our neighborhoods. Boston has faced increasingly challenges in the street and sidewalk flooding. It's time for us to step into the community and tackle the problem. So since our last meeting, the response for the community has been incredibly encouraging. Many of you took the time to complete the Boston Flood Survey, sharing not only your experiences, but also showing specific locations of where the flooding has impacted your homes, the streets, and the neighborhood. This is the kind of local knowledge that we're really looking for. It helps the city of Boston better understand where and how flooding is occurring, so we can plan more effectively and equitably for green infrastructure solutions. We are seeing firsthand how community voices can shape this really meaningful action. So every submission that you've made, every photo that you took, that you've taken, and every street name that you shared has been just an immense valuable contribution to this project. This will really inform the funding decisions and the placement of the stormwater infrastructure, like the rain gardens, the bio whales, and the permeable walkways. And I apologize for not being able to pronounce some of those words. So in today's meeting, it's about really continuing that conversation and kind of keeping up that momentum. We'll be diving deeper in what we've learned so far a little bit. And please correct me, guys, if I'm saying something a little bit off. We're gonna be highlighting some of the areas of concerns that we potentially saw. And then we're also gonna share some next steps on how we as a community can work together to take care of this problem in our community. So thank you again for joining us this evening and being part of this process. We really appreciate you. Your voice matters and your involvement is really making a difference. So thank you.
Did I end it?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Hortensia. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Luna, Interim Director for the Office of Green Infrastructure with the City of Boston, and I'm going to introduce our team that we have here today. You just heard from Hortensia de Rosario, Visit Nubian Square. We have Julie Wood and Joanna Argudo from Charles River Watershed Association. Karen Gross-Horan from Neponset River Watershed Association, Jenny Moonen and Indrani Ghosh from Weston and Sampson. And yeah, that's the team that we have here today. So our agenda, we just did our welcome. We're going to talk about stormwater and green infrastructure, the flood survey data that we have received, our engagement summary, our priority area selection process and results, and then we will go over questions. So for this meeting format, during the presentation, all microphones will be muted. Once the presentation is over, we'll take questions and comments in two ways. You can feel free to type your comment in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll take your questions at the end in the order they were raised. I just introduced the individuals from the project team, but overall, the greater project team is the public, you, Boston residents, commuters, students, visitors. We want to hear from you all. The City of Boston is the project lead. So our office, the Office of Green Infrastructure, along with Office of Neighborhood Services and Community Engagement Cabinets, and Boston Water and Sewer. And then our community-based organizations and nonprofits, as I mentioned, Charles River Watershed, Mystic River, Neponset River, Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corp, and Visit Nubian. And then we have Weston and Sampson, our design, planning, and engineers. Oh. All right, so stormwater and green infrastructure. So some of these photos are taken right outside here at the library in Nubian Square. Stormwater is generated when rain falls on impervious surfaces like roads, driveways, roofs, and runs off rather than absorbing into the ground. Catch basins in these roadways collect the runoff and convey it to our water bodies. And this photo is in Audubon Circle in Fenway. Oops. Okay, so what's the problem here? Quality. As stormwater travels along the hard impervious surfaces, it picks up pollutants and litter along the way. The storm drains and releases into our water bodies, which creates impaired waters, damages ecosystems, and tends to close beaches. And then quantity, during our typical storm events, stormwater is largely captured and conveyed by storm drains, but during the large storm events, the storm drain system can become overwhelmed and outfalls can be blocked by storm surge that's higher than normal tides, resulting in stormwater flooding. Typically, the pipes are sized for 5 inches per hour. And so that's why they cannot handle many of the large storm events. So expected stormwater impacts. This photo came from our Climate Ready Boston Map Explorer, and it shows stormwater inundation in the city. And it's in every neighborhood. It affects us all. So green infrastructure is our solution to manage some of this flooding and water quality concerns. So GI uses plants, soil, and other natural materials to mimic or restore the natural water cycle. GI can capture, purify, store, infiltrate stormwater back into the groundwater. And here's one of our bioretention areas at Harambee Park. This is a Boston Parks and Recreation Department project in Dorchester. So some other types of green infrastructure features, bioretention, bioswales, and rain gardens. These are primarily excellent in our roadway runoff scenarios, where runoff from the road can come directly into these bioswales. We also have tree pits and tree trenches. That's another feature that the city uses often. Construction wetlands are great when you have large amount of runoff coming to your site, and if you have certain site conditions like high groundwater table, and then green roofs as well. There are many co-benefits to green infrastructure. That includes increased urban green space and the tree canopy, reduced urban heat island effect. It can help with slower streets, improve pedestrian and cyclist safety, more biodiversity, pollinator habitat, reduced energy usage, improved environmental justice, for air quality, access to nature, food security, and opportunities for environmental education. So the next couple slides are a few sites that we have GI in Boston. This is the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway. This was a part of a parks project. Here we have Franklin Field at a Boston Housing Authority. Office of Green Infrastructure designed this rain garden, and we constructed it with the youth that live at Franklin Fields. And here is a good example of our streetscape green infrastructure. This is at New England Ave in Dorchester. This is a bioswale, and that's a larger bioretention area in the lower right corner. Oh, shoot. What do I keep doing?
This window pops up.
Thank you. All right, another parks project. They're an excellent collaborator. Cassidy Playground in Brighton. And then in Hyde Park, there's a urban wild that leads down to the Neponset River. So we planted a bioswale with the Epic Youth Service Warriors. And then at the Early Education Center in East Boston, we had a very cute little planting event with a bunch of the students that go to the school. We planted a nice rain garden in their parking lot. And then Nubian Square. So yeah, this is a nice tree trench and bioswale. So the project overview from October 2024 to June 2025. We've started building out our inland flooding database by collecting the data from the survey, developing a data display from the crowdsourced data that we collected here, and started our site prioritization and initial design. And so these will prioritize the areas with flooding hotspots, and we're working to progress our design concepts. And so next steps, July 2025 through June 2026 is really advancing those concept designs and that interactive display for the public. And we are still collecting data beyond the end of this contract of June 2026. So please keep providing information. And so what is the MVP program? This project is funded by a grant called the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant. It's a program offered by the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. It provides support to cities and towns in Massachusetts to plan for climate change and implement priority projects. So the Boston Community-Based Flood Resilience and Green Infrastructure Planning Grant, what total was $449,710 with an in-kind match of $14,000 and a cash match of $36,000, and providing $90,000 of grant to community partners. And with that, I'll turn it over to Julie.
Good evening, all. All right, thank you all for bearing with the fun and excitement of a hybrid meeting. Hopefully going well so far. So as you've heard, a huge piece of this project was getting input from the community about not only where is the flooding, but where is the flooding causing you problems? That was a big piece of what the city was trying to gain with this. We can do engineering maps, we can do hydrologic maps, we can do all that tech stuff, and it can give a good sense of where flooding is happening. But does it really give a great sense of where flooding is causing problem for residents? No. For that, we need to hear from the residents. So just a quick show of hands. Did anyone submit a flood impact survey?
Maybe.
Okay, all right. Okay, those that did not raise your hand, and hopefully online you were raising your hands as well, and I just can't see you. If you did not raise your hand, I think you know what your homework is. After this meeting, if it not in this heat wave, but when we have some rain and some relief, we're going to ask you to complete the survey, and that again, to help the city understand where is flooding happening in your neighborhood and what are the problems that it's causing. So I'm just gonna provide a little summary of one, what we've done to get the word out, and then how many reports we've gotten so far. All right, now it's my turn to be awkward with the mouse. Okay. Okay. So here's just some photos of different types of flooding that we see in the city of Boston. Flooding after heavy rain. This project is primarily focused on that type of flooding after heavy rain. Obviously, Boston is also susceptible to impacts from coastal flooding, but a lot of effort has gone into studying that and understanding that. And in some ways, it's maybe more of an event, a little bit more predictable because it's either from the tides or a big storm that we know is coming. Whereas this inland flooding can be really pernicious and kind of sneak up on us and cause problems that we might not be expecting. So this is that coastal flooding. And then some more coastal flooding out in East Boston, obviously very severe in that case. So all of these, you know, things that are considered flooding, varying levels of flooding, varying impacts, you know, this maybe might not look like a big deal, but if you're an individual who perhaps has mobility issues and uses a scooter or a wheelchair, this might be a real challenge. Let me see if I can point with it. Okay, if the folks online can see where I'm pointing, I'll use this to point. Apologies to our online attendees. So I've already covered a bunch of this, but why did we crowdsource this data? One, we get real-time reports and they're from all over the city. If a team of people were trying to capture this data, it would be near impossible versus trying to mobilize every resident. We all have these fancy computers in our pockets, photos, easy to take photos, can upload them right to the city. So real value there. Also access to local and historical knowledge. So through this survey, we've actually gotten old photos. So people had photos on their phone. They went in and submitted it. Maybe it's a photo they took 2 years ago, went in and submitted it. So there's that. There's also the fact that you know your neighborhood and you kind of know what the issues are. You see it every time. So you can think to yourself, oh, next time it's raining, I'm going to go out, I'm going to take a shot of that, and I'm going to get that site into the city because I know it's a real issue. I mentioned the citywide data collection. The city can't be everywhere all at once. And then it's also a good way to engage residents to start the conversation, again, all specifically about inland flooding and rain-induced flooding. Because, again, not that it's not important to sea level rise in the coastal flooding, but that conversation is something that's being had, not quite as much on the rain-induced and inland flooding. And that certainly is an issue as well. So again, just some more photos that we've seen submitted through the survey. I think this is probably a common thing that almost everyone has observed where the parking area gets flooded. And then this is at the East Boston Greenway here. You know, if that's your commuting route, obviously that's going to be an issue right in through there. All right. The survey is available in 7 languages. So we're trying to capture as many folks willing to submit data. We want to make it as easy as possible. It has about a handful of questions. Most of them are not required. If you're in a real rush, you can, you know, go through it pretty quickly. And that photo is a key thing. We do really want that photo. So our role on the project at Charles River Watershed Association with our partners at Neponset River Watershed Association and Visit Nubian and Codman Square and Mystic River. Our role on the project was to really go out and promote the survey. So this meeting is part of that continued effort. If you guys can tell your friends and neighbors about the survey, we'd appreciate it. But we had some advertisements right downtown. We did some senior center visits. We did some tabling, and then print materials. A few more examples here. Let's see. We went and spoke with the Age Strong Advisory Council. That's a picture of Rachel, Joanna, and I. We also spoke with the Disability Advisory Board Executive Committee. These were at the very beginning of the project where we were actually still taking some input and feedback on the survey to help make it more accessible. A lot of engagement with 311. Jenny's going to talk more about this, but that was an amazing historical data set that we got access to. So a lot of engagement with 311, both to get historical data or past data, as well as to integrate, well, how can we get new reports as they come in? So they were great. And then the Office of Climate Resilience, because obviously they're interested in this as well. So lots of great city partners on this. We had some traditional print media even to try and raise awareness. And then old school paper flyers as well in libraries and coffee shops. And we had these available in a bunch of different languages, all 7 that the survey is available in. So just a quick promotion summary. We went to 16 events or stakeholder meeting. We estimate over 350 people reached, so pretty good compared to the population of Boston. We got a ways to go, but it's hard to measure the signage and the advertisements. That was probably more in the thousands. These are direct interactions. Press, social media posts, e-newsletter, blog post, a wonderful social media video starring Joanna that hopefully you will all see come across your social media streams at some point. As I mentioned, lots of neighborhood flyering and 2 months of those promotional campaigns on the bus stalls and those big screens right at downtown crossing. Okay, so what did we get from all that outreach? We got 138 survey responses, pretty good. Pretty good coverage across the city, as you can see. Certainly some gaps that we'd love to fill in. This is going to be open for at least another year, hopefully beyond that, but the funding that Rachel described will fund it confirmed for the next year. So love to fill in some gaps there, but still it's all not concentrated in one part of the city, as you can see. December 2024 through June 2025, that's pretty much, that was the span of, like, we launched it last December. And so we've, gotten reports throughout that time. A lot of that time wasn't a drought. That did, if there's not flooding, you're not going to get reports of flooding. So we're out of the drought, so we'll see what happens. And then, as I mentioned, one of the things we were looking for was, how did this flooding impact you? So folks mentioned things like longer drive and walk times, inaccessible destinations, and even property damage. And then the next 2 slides just show some photos of what folks are sending in. So the parking lane flooding, common one. That's in on the left in East Boston, in the middle on Comm Ave in Alston. This really goes all the way across the road. And then flooding near Wellington Hill, March 2024. So again, someone had a photo on their phone and uploaded it in, which is great. You don't have to take it right that moment. Please feel free to submit whatever you've gotten. And then the last slide of examples here. Again, roadway flooding a sidewalk ramp could be an issue with accessibility, flooding downtown. And then this one is another example of a historical submission, pretty severe flooding in Hyde Park, where you can see the water's coming up pretty high on that parked car right there. Okay, and with that, I will hand it over to Jenny. To Andrade. Okay, excellent. To talk about fixing the problems.
Thank you, Julie, for walking us through the background of the data collection process. We're going to dive right into how we use the data that we received through the survey and additional data that the city already had to identify, hone in where the issues are, and get to the solution piece of the project. So as we talked about, the survey that we launched is one of the central components of this project, where we received a lot of responses from the respondents, and that helped build our database for flood reports. In addition to that, we tapped into existing databases that the city had, such as the 311 calls. That was a huge database that we went back to almost 1996. And that had reports and complaints from the city from across all neighborhoods that had been logged, which was, you know, it could have been flooding issues, it could have been other water damages, but we did go through that entire database. There were other calls logged in through police and fire, as well as we used cities' existing models, such as the one that Rachel had on her slide that looked at the flood modeling that had been done by Boston Water and Sewer Commission to identify flooding hotspots. In addition to that, we also looked at other local and statewide resources in terms of identifying where the projects will be sited, and Jenny's going to talk a little bit more about that as we get into that section, but we did look at existing roadway projects that the city had already planned for, and could there be incremental opportunities to add green infrastructure to that. We also use lessons learned from past green infrastructure nature-based solution projects, looking at who owns what parcel, where it's the city ownership. The city has more ability and jurisdiction to implement projects in those locations. A central component of this project was also focused on looking at priority populations and vulnerable neighborhoods in the city. So we looked at the environmental justice data that the city has, as well as trying to identify co-benefits, and Rachel touched a little bit on that, looking at opportunities where we can mitigate urban heat island impacts. And so the information that we looked at in terms of identifying the hotspots, looked at flooding issues, but to identify solutions, we also looked at potential other considerations as highlighted here. And we'll present some of those shortly. Sorry, thought I was moving it in the right direction. If I do this, would that work?
It might have, it gets off the screen, is the problem. So the touch screen.
Is it just, I thought I was able to do it this way. I'm sorry,
Did it?
apologies to forward. Thank you. So use that.
The scroll, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, thank you. So we took all of this data that we received, the 311, the additional data sets that we had from BWSC. In addition to looking at the modeling data from BWSC, we also looked at the data that the commission had received for flood reports and flood complaints, and the survey data that we gathered through the course of this project. However, because as I mentioned, it was an exhaustive database of flood reports that we had to comb through that went all the way back for more than 2 decades. We looked at understanding what was actually related to flooding and stormwater flooding issues, as opposed to understanding if it was flooding from a broken pipe or a water main burst, and trying to piece that was really going into the database to identify where those reports were coming from, actual reported flooding. The geospatial component of this is a key component of this project, because the data that we had received through these different databases did not necessarily come with a visual output that was mapped at different locations, right? We had addresses, we had names of intersections, or input that was provided from other in other ways that had some geographic location but was not shown on a map. So we went through that entire exercise to be able to map those out on the city's GIS-based mapping interface that we're using, and then be able to then show all of the data that we've assimilated, but visually being able to get the so what across to you, right? Like, all the data that we have received, how do we show that? Do we show it as a bunch of maps? Or are we able to better communicate to understand where the hotspots are? So we used an approach called the kernel density approach, which essentially is all of these flooding reports and hotspots that we have assimilated appear as dots on a map. But that could be too overwhelming to see a bunch of dots being scattered throughout the map. So there is a mathematical process where we look at that data and we create sort of a flooding hotspot, which is a density map based on like smoothing out those points, but still be able to understand what is the number of complaints per square mile. And so the map that you see here on the right is that hotspot map that shows the distribution of flooding hotspots across the city. The darker colors correspond to what you're seeing here are flood complaints per square mile. And so some of the darker colors that appear in darker red and maroon here correspond to greater density of flood reports as we received from that database, with the lighter colors showing lesser complaints from those areas. But there could be an inherent bias associated with that, because there could be neighborhoods where more complaints come in. Does that necessarily mean that those neighborhoods are the only neighborhoods that are seeing more flooding issues? Probably not. So to go through that, or to eliminate that, we did look at all of the neighborhoods within the city, and within each neighborhood, we tried to identify what the hotspots were within each neighborhood to better identify the flooding problems by neighborhood. Because if we didn't want it, we looked at it across the city, but then we honed in to identify what the problem areas are per neighborhood. So this is the neighborhood we're in here. We're in Roxbury, so you see the Roxbury neighborhood. And this just shows sort of the clustering of flooding hotspots over by the northern area of the neighborhood. And this is a conglomeration of the flooding data that we received through the survey that came in from the period of December through June, through the 311 calls, as well as through the BWSC flooding hotspot database that was identified. And that sort of led us to know where the issues are that we should be focusing on as we develop the concepts. And Jenny's going to talk a little more about that.
Everybody, nice to see you all. Jenny Moonen from Weston and Sampson. I'm a civil engineer. My team's been working on, identifying where we can strategically put green infrastructure. That you could put it. There's a lot of places you could put green infrastructure. We're, with this project trying to get to. It's gonna work. Look at that. We're able to concept a few designs in this project. So we're thinking about it in terms of corridors or areas that are highly visible. There's a lot of components. So just to go over the big goal, right? GSI could go all sorts of places. It can be part of all sorts of city projects. But we're really looking at where do these align with the flooding hotspots? We wanted to kind of scatter them across different neighborhoods, right? We weren't going to give one neighborhood all three projects. A priority was to put these projects in environmental justice communities. And I am going to talk about what that definition is in a minute. And also kind of scatter them around the different watersheds too, right? We have project partners in the Charles, we have project partners in the Mystic and the Neponset. So again, it's sort of spreading the wealth of this work. Reminder for those who may not be familiar with this, environmental justice are populations that basically meet a certain number of criteria. It could be one or more of these criteria. So it's income related, race related, or limited English proficiency. And you can see on the right a map of the different communities in Boston. So as we were doing our screening, we were using these criteria. And if a community met all three, that would be a higher priority than a community that only met one, if that makes sense to folks. And then neighborhoods. Most of you are familiar with the many neighborhoods in Boston, but we did look at all 26 neighborhoods. And then these purple lines on the map are the different watersheds. You can see up here, this part of Boston is in the Mystic River watershed. Quite a bit of Boston is located in the Charles River watershed. That's in the middle of the map. And a little bit of the south part of Boston is in the Neponset River watershed. So again, looking to spread our wealth across the 3 different areas. Indrani and Kate, excuse me, oh my gosh. I'm sorry. Rachel talked about, all the existing excuse me, let me start over. Let's do this one more time. Rachel talked about all the great existing green infrastructure the city's put in. So we actually wanted to sort of stay away from existing green infrastructure projects, right? People in those neighborhoods may be familiar with that work. So trying to put it in a new area to benefit people that haven't experienced it. Of course, overlapping with existing city projects, right? Thinking about transportation, roadway reconstruction, kind of staying away from coastal projects that are already undergoing. City is, of course, doing a lot of work to adapt to and mitigate coastal flooding. So we really wanted to leave that separate. And working on Boston Parks and Recreation Department parks that are identified as high priorities. So we were kind of considering that too as places we could put green infrastructure. Again, high visibility areas, right? Bicycle network, intersections, transit stations, areas with high foot traffic. Those all kind of became higher ranked areas. And then of thinking about actual implementation, right? It's certainly easier to build these practices on land owned by the city as opposed to a private property owner. So that all factored into our screening. We got to 3 sites from that. So this map is showing this 3 areas that sort of rose to the top. We did a whole numeric ranking in the background. We did not have time to go through that tonight with the public, but happy to talk about it more if people have questions. These were projects that the city also had identified. Bless you. The city had identified as overlapping with infrastructure work and planned work. So I'll just quickly walk through what those areas are. This is the first one. It's in East Boston. Let's see. At Bennington Street and Brooks Street. And so this is not a design. I just want to be clear. This is not a conceptual green infrastructure design. This is just a map showing the area that we're gonna look at for designs. So, and these little blue, what would you call these? Dots, points. Those are actually, we've done a whole analysis using what Indrani was talking about in the background. We can do, spatial analysis to under where the water flows and where is it going to pool. These are some of the points where it pools pretty heavily in this area. And that's because of topography and ground cover and imperviousness and the drainage network. So we're just getting started here. But this is sort of the area we're looking at. Another high priority area that showed up was in Mattapan, Almond Street at Blue Hill Ave. So thinking about overlapping this with the Blue Hill Ave project that's currently in design. So you can see, again, these green areas are showing approximate extent that we're going to be exploring. And these blue dots are sort of those low points where flow really is accumulating. And the last area is in Brighton, Washington Street, near Washington Street Station. Basically thinking about strategically incorporating this into the Commonwealth Avenue project that's being just thought about now. So those are sort of what we got to. And with that, I think I'm turning it back over. Oh, nope, I'm gonna keep talking. Let me give you some examples of what these concepts can look like. We're not there yet, but sometimes to help it be simple, we, like the image on the left, we're just showing, basically on a map, where could the practices be with some really simple labels. We can do it in more of a roadway where you can actually see, oh, what plants are, we're going to put some plants in. There's some other ways we do this. We can do a whole view. This is where we're leaning towards a sort of a 3D rendering type visual so people can really understand what could this look like. Now, this is obviously a big project. So this is perhaps past where, we're looking at those corridors. But here's an example of a school. This is in Worcester. We were helping them understand, what's it going to look like? What's the scale compared to people and cars? But look, new trees, permeable parking, the bump outs with bioretention. So it gives you a sense of perspective and space that I think some people can relate to better than the maps. But you also could have a map-based option, so you can see, oh, look, this is the areas where we're gonna plant, and these are where we're gonna add trees. So this is sort of gives you a sense of that space as well. Another example, right? This is actually the perspective view of the last example I just walked over as a map. So you guys are getting the idea of what these concepts are gonna look like. We just don't have them ready for you yet. So with that, I think I'm turning it back over to Julie. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, so next steps and staying involved. You have already been given your homework assignments to submit the flood survey. We have, it's either the next slide or the one after has a QR code, so you can get it up. Keep it as a little tab in your phone, and then it's ready to go whenever you need it. Tell your friends and neighbors to document their flooding observations. We have some flyers over there if folks are oh yes, we also have little business cards if that's easier. If folks are willing to take some of those, drop them somewhere where you frequent, or just in your own neighborhood, we would appreciate that. And then, you know, Jenny mentioned there's a big, or maybe it was Rachel, like forgetting who said what at this point, sorry. We have a big piece of the project that is dedicated to getting community groups involved. And, you know, we're one of them, obviously, some of us here are in that category. To help spread the word, reach new groups, really get that number up, get more flooding reports into the city. So if you're involved with a group that you think might want to come on the project as an actual partner, we would welcome it. Yes, we would welcome that so much that it is a paid opportunity. Good point. So thank you in advance for your help. Thanks to those of you that already have submitted. This is the QR code where you can open up that survey. So you have it tabbed on your phone, same for you online. And with that, we'll pause for questions. I think we'll start with questions in the room, and then we can go to online.
Have there been any consideration to create a program targeted towards youth? Considering so many kids have iPads at home, and that could become like a local project that we can promote to local schools to get the kids to go out and then just do it, you know, like local explorers. Because they have access, they go home to their communities and they know exactly what they see. Every child splashed in the mud at least once as a kid, right? And so now you see it's a green infrastructure issue. So to me, we work a lot with a lot of the local schools. So is there some type of way to create a program so that we can target one of the students to get their part involved?
I think that would be great. We haven't done any dedicated youth outreach to date. It's been either the specific groups I mentioned or just, you know, general public, but nothing targeted to youth. And so, yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Very great. Thank you.
Not a question, more comment. I think that's a really good idea. I just graduated our university, but a lot of classes are like project-based learning, and I think this is a great thing to get involved in. Not to get the project when they do.
Excellent. Yeah. I don't know if folks online can hear as well with the, okay. The first comment was asking if we had done any dedicated youth outreach. And then the second comment was suggesting that might be a good idea. I think more maybe with the college age. We did do flyering specifically on the university campuses. But no direct tie-in with classes or anything. So yeah, that would also be a welcome opportunity. Did someone else? Okay, yes.
I have a question. Have you thought about collaborating with various other CDCs and other community centers with groups?
Yes. Question was, have we thought about collaborating with other CDCs and other groups? Yes. the beginning of this round, when we first found out about the funding, which was last fall, Rachel's predecessor at the time, Kate, put out a pretty wide call to a lot of groups that work with the city. These state grants have a very strict timeline, I will say. You know, you have to sort of have the resources, the personnel and stuff ready to go right off the bat, and, you know, commit to doing a certain amount of work through June. So it can be a little tricky. We are now in this second piece of our work. Probably calendar dates won't mean a ton to you guys in the audience, but the second piece of our work starts in July and goes all the way around till next June. So it's a full 12 months. We're hoping that we might be able to bring in a few more groups with that longer timeline. Because yes, we have been looking for more partners and have the funding for more partners. It's more just been that, you know, sometimes, and speaking from someone who's had a long time in the nonprofit community, it can be pretty, you know, you got your other projects that you have to work on, and sometimes it can be hard to drop everything and do a quick turnaround project. So we're hopeful that we will end up bringing on more partners on this next second phase of the grant.
So I just want to elaborate, because I don't necessarily mean other nonprofits to actually partner with. I mean, as far as like, you're in a community right now, there's not a lot of people from the community. And I'm just trying to figure like where I am, like in Fields Corner, Vietnamese community. Up on the corner, Cape Verdean, that's not even what we're doing. Drop it. And then you have Tahitian. So there are community centers that are based around those groups in Boston, you know, various parts, all of it. So I'm thinking, we host them, making sure that and this way, meet people who may not be able to figure out how to do this, even though the flyers. I mean, I know there's.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
This is general.
That's what we do a little more of, to be honest, is go to groups, engage with groups, have had smaller group meetings. That's what we have done more of than attempt to do like a big meeting like this. Yes.
And
Yeah.
I can attest to that.
Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
some Cape Verdean, so I did do some outreach to the Cape Verdean community. We didn't have a Cape Verdean flyer, but I did use the Spanish flyers for one of the Cape Verdean. Can understand Spanish, so I did do some outreach to the Cape Verdean community.
And I will note on the languages piece, we did work with the city to use the referral pages for neighborhoods, so we missed some, we can follow up with that for the next year.
Yeah.
Any online comments or questions?
An initiative in support of Main Street, considering that Main Street has pretty large groups, you know, support from small business. Putting it in front of a Main Street might be able to reach about 1,500 people. So that might be an idea for just their local.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead of that. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we can do more of that. Yeah. Which is a little harder.
Yeah. We'll push it again.
Might have to like that. Yeah. The question was, why, or have we reached out to Main Street's organizations? And initially we didn't get too much feedback for the short time, frame as Julie had mentioned, but, we'll push a little harder this fiscal year.
Lucy, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, sure. Thank you all. My question is around your past and projected collaboration with the Public Works Department in terms of maintenance and upkeep of any green infrastructure projects that you implement, in terms of, projects that they're working on independently, such as addressing potholes or fixing sidewalks, often of which exist in close proximity to many of the infrastructure that you're suggesting?
Hi, Lucy, I can talk to that. Our office has a maintenance contract for green infrastructure only at this time. And so for most of the city-owned green infrastructure, we do routine maintenance. We have not, I guess, gone into like noticing specific potholes near GEI particularly, but I know Public Works is working on repairing potholes in the city. I know there's a lot, so it's gonna be a time-consuming process. Did that answer your question?
That did, yes.
Okay, thanks.
So on the slide that you have the three different main areas for the focus. Is it something that the rest of the one that top three, the rest are actually being ranked in a certain way to determine? And how do you figure out which of the different options are like, oh, well, because it's next to, like, oh, we can do this versus happening, is that when the architects come into play?
I can answer that question. So the question for those online was about, how looking at our top three locations, what was the ranking process to get there? And then how are we thinking about actually concepting, right? It was sort of two parts. So, okay, the ranking process that we undertook, and I shouldn't be out in public today. The ranking process that we undertook was sort of quantitative and intuitive in both ways. So we had gone through and we overlapped. So let me kind of summarize this from the beginning. We started with the hotspots for each neighborhood, and then we overlaid that with environmental justice. And we wanted to find areas where there were three, the community area had three environmental justice criteria. So there was a numeric system we used that in the background, like a 1, 2, 3, if you will, and then also a weighting process at the end. But we basically were looking at, is the flooding hotspot in an environmental justice neighborhood? Is it overlapping with community projects? Is it overlapping with, in transit areas and bike paths and, the high pedestrian areas? I don't have the entire table memorized, I apologize. But so
Urban heat islands
and
and green deserts were also criteria.
Yep. So we used a numeric system, and then every neighborhood hotspot, I think we had 3 per neighborhood, right? So we took the top 3 flooding spots per neighborhood and got down to like which one is the highest per neighborhood. And then we started looking at like, where do these overlap with community projects that are in the right phase of planning? Because you can't it doesn't make sense to come up with a concept for a project where the city's already done 25% design or is close to construction. It's just not cost effective at that point to add it in, and there's a lot of coordination. So we're really trying to get ahead of those projects so that when the city proceeds, they have kind of a blueprint of ideas. So that's the first piece in the ranking that helps.
Yeah.
The second piece, when we actually go through and screen for these, we have a team of engineers, landscape architects, and arborists, and they're thinking about, that we've been designing these all over, the East Coast. So we're thinking about what's practical, what's the city going to be able to maintain, what's worked well for the city before, what can you fit given all the different constraints, right? Utility conflicts, you need pedestrian safety, you need parking, you need complete streets, right? So bike safety, all of those pieces have to come together in the thought process. And so that's why it's sort of a big team that's looking at this for a design concept. And we'll be having a lot of back and forth with the city and their design staff, so that everyone's sort of agreeing what makes sense for actual implementation. And then we'll be taking it to the public and hear what the public's concerns are. So that'll be the whole next year.
And so if you end up getting like a lot more people, it's like, oh, there's amount of X where, okay, it's like now, oh my God, it's unbelievable, we're on flooding. Will that negate the ones that are already in the process because, oh, so many people are submitting, and so, wait, we should take a look at this because of there's so many, like, is it possible, like, type of paper, like the issue becomes more because the number of And also, is something like Morrison Boulevard, which is just like the flag, end up coinciding with what we discussed as part of this, where it's such a environment.
So this is almost, I'll repeat for those online and make sure, hopefully I capture this, and I think we'll co-answer this. So the question was, what if basically people submit a bunch of reports and there's a new hotspot in the next year that really comes to shine as a big deal? Will we reprioritize and look at that area? Unfortunately, with the scope of this project, we won't, but it doesn't mean the city won't use this information in the future. Yeah. And then the second part of the question was about sort of the specific projects that are ongoing, and I think Rachel will have to answer that one.
So the Morrissey Boulevard, I am not, that's more of it's both inland flooding and, coastal. So our Office of Climate Resilience, well, I know, it's really a bad one. So our Office of Coastal Resilience is really leading that, charge. With, I believe the road is owned by TCR. That's one of those multiple stakeholders, multiple people in the mix. It ends up getting very complicated. And so that's, that is being worked on. People are very aware of that issue. But yeah, if other, new flooding concerns come up and into play, we will raise that to like streets cabinet leadership and, start maybe bringing that into fruition depending on funding and all that stuff. Or, maybe we apply for grants for this or for this specific project, things of that nature. But that's what the hope of this, survey is to keep receiving that data so that we know where that flooding is happening, so we can keep proceeding with more projects, to alleviate those, spots. Yeah.
And I think some, sorry, did I cut in a question? Some other tools, it's not just projects, and this is, Boston and really any other community, it's the same thing. It's not just immediate projects to address a specific flooding. Cities and towns do have other tools in their toolbox to address flooding as well, like around policy, ordinances, requirements for new development and redevelopment. So while the data is great and understanding it, and some can be resolved by these very cool looking projects that Jenny showed us all, there is also like the bigger holistic picture that this data can feed into informing some of those types of things as well.
I don't know if there are any health outcomes associated with flooding, but if there are, would you include that? And then also with like populations that are vulnerable, if homeless population, that so.
So we did, I'll repeat the question.
Oh, thank you.
I'll repeat the question. So your question was related to how the locations that we ended up selecting, how did we factor in priority population groups and vulnerable population groups? And how are we addressing that? And then I think you had another part to your question.
Any like health outcomes.
The flooding outcomes, how would we assess the flooding outcomes? So I will reiterate that the way we selected those sites did factor in the flooding outcomes and the hotspots data that we had received. Sort of that was the premise of how the flooding hotspot data, it was an outcome of what either infrastructure was impacted or residential property was impacted. So the outcome was factored into the flooding hotspot database. When we selected the sites, as Jenny mentioned, we did factor in the environmental justice population groups. We know that that is not the be all and end all of vulnerable population groups, but that is the best available data that the state has, that EA, the grantor for this is recommending be used as one of the criteria. After we developed the concepts, the outreach to the neighborhoods and to the community for those in the project areas will also We will make sure that we address the community's needs through the design process, as well as take those designs for community input that will factor in potentially. And, you know, that's a targeted outreach that this team is committed to doing to sort of provide that this project as a platform for receiving input as well on the community informed designs. This is actually one of the first projects I would say that the city has done where the design is completely being led by on the community engaged input side, right? Like a lot of design projects happen that are based on needs, but then the city goes to the community to receive input. Here, the entire project is being driven by community-based input.
And then Indrani, when the designs are done, is there, I guess I know the answer to this because I've worked on projects with you, but you guys then have some understanding about how and why that will address the flooding. And you can show like, adds this much storage and now just that piece.
Yes, correct. I was
Yeah.
going to mention that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. So in addition to assessing the outcomes of why that area was selected because it was vulnerable to flooding, although this project will not be necessarily modeling using a mathematical model what the reduction would be in flooding, we will be able to make some estimates of how the proposed designs and the concepts that we will be coming up, how would that mitigate flooding? How much flood volume would that design be able to accommodate? You know, what would that mean in terms of alleviating roadway flooding? What would that mean potentially in terms of alleviating flooding to beyond the roadway into property lines, into private property and commercial property? So we will be able to make some best professional judgment using the designs that we will be developing.
Can I ask something, along the lines of that, because I think that's such valuable knowledge. I wonder what the city does around signage, once green infrastructure goes in, like, how do we make that community learning? I saw this fantastic signage up in New Hampshire and I was like, I was shocked, like, wow, they did a really good job of explaining what this green infrastructure is doing and how it's preventing X number of, you know, gallons of excess flooding.
Yeah, so some of our sites have larger pieces that explain how many pounds of phosphorus we're removing, how much the total spent solids, the total volume of water stored. We don't have them at all, but that is a goal of our office, is to create these. And so we're working on like a standardized kind of sign. I mean, obviously each site's individual and different, but to come up with this template to be able to provide that for the community for sure.
I have a question. I see this mostly about outreach and engagement, but in terms of engineering, do we know the future of asphalt? It seems that we're still building roads the same way in 10 years.
So the question was, do we know the future of asphalt, and if we're still building the same way in 10 years, you know, what are we going to be facing the same conditions? I'm trying to figure out how to actually, you know, help answer your question. I mean, I'm not a transportation engineer, so I'm not an expert in asphalt by any means.
I put it in Chairman. So our office, the Office of Green Infrastructure, has developed a streets policy, which for all new right-of-ways or all fully reconstructed right-of-ways, there are certain requirements that they will need to infiltrate or reduce the amount of impervious area that they're building. Because you can see some of these intersections drive through just large swaths of pavement that don't need to be there at all. So it's really prioritizing that we only need as much pavement as we need, and and where that pavement is being installed, that we're treating it with the green infrastructure. Yeah, so that's something we've been working on, but as far as the asphalt mix.
That's not something I can answer. We certainly have evolved in our understanding of porous pavements in the last decade, and it's certainly people now understand how to mix them, how to lay them, how to watch them set properly, you know, what the subsurface has to be, what loads they can carry, right, from in terms of like how big a vehicle can you park or drive on and what happens to them, how well they work with different levels of maintenance. So that that from that perspective has certainly evolved in time, but it's still not, porous pavement is not the solution for every road. Yeah, Rachel was talking about the guidance manual. If you heard the term road diet before, this is a term, I love it, but it's basically what Rachel was talking about is rethinking your roadway corridor in a different way to combine all these different pieces, right? Like reduce your impervious cover, but create the spaces for pedestrians and bike lanes. Where I live, they're putting in bike lanes that are porous. So the bike lanes are porous, but the sidewalks are still concrete and the roads are much narrower. And there's green infrastructure as well. So I don't live in Boston though, disclaimer.
And the question was, what is the future of asphalt? And if we keep building the same way, are we gonna keep having the same problem?
And the only other comment I'll add to that is using lighter colored asphalt materials and pavement materials. That is also something that is being assessed in the engineering practices, because that could reduce the urban heat island impact. Darker colored surfaces have lesser reflectivity and greater heat absorptivity power. So looking at lighter colored asphalt and paving materials is also being explored in addition to the porous practices that Jenny mentioned.
And I could add like just another marketing thing. I promoted the flyer on next door. Yeah, like over like 600 to 800 people.
Yeah.
So and I believe everybody might have their next door happen at home.
Yeah.
So I would advise you just take a photo, post it on your next door. That's gonna just invite so many people in the local communities to activate.
Yeah.
It's been a really good tool. I do a lot of social media marketing for our tourism business, and I do a lot of promoting the infrastructure. So we get a lot of like follow up and get involved. So I just coordinate them into how do I get involved with what do I do next, take a photo, upload, and just give them the whole blueprint. And just social media marketing really help. And that's for us a lot of it follow up and how we folks don't take it upon themselves and then they really take it all back. Social media, that's next door app could work for us. Nobody.
No, it's a really good suggestion. Suggestion was to use Nextdoor app more. Yeah, I think that is a good one. Any other online comments or questions? Not seeing any, no direct chats over there. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I just want to thank everyone for showing up, whether you were here with us in person and enjoyed some pizza and air conditioning, or if you're at home. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about this project, and please continue to be involved.